Thank you everyone for joining us for this first installment of Preservation Resource Center and Commercial Real Estate Women of New Orleans joint series, Vision to Reality. It's going to be a series of 3 lunch and learns held via Zoom that explore what it takes to bring a commercial renovation project from concept through design to execution. So I'm really excited about the panelists we have with us and really excited about this opportunity to partner with Crew on the series. My name is Nathan Lott. I am Policy Research Director and Advocacy Coordinator for Preservation Resource Center of New Orleans. And I just want to take a few moments to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. In addition to online classes like this one, we do in-person events, often featuring newly renovated projects. That's our Beams and Brews series. We publish a magazine, 10 months out of the year, Preservation in Print. So if you are a member of Preservation Resource Center, you will receive our award-winning magazine. We also host practical classes through our Buy Right and Maintain Right series, and a special series called Historic House Specialists for people that want to go in depth and become experts in historic housing, particularly the housing of the Gulf Coast and New Orleans. And last but not least, I'd be remiss not to put in a plug for our upcoming annual gala. That's the Julia Jump. It'll be May 20th this year in the evening, 6:30 to 10:30 at the recently renovated and relaunched World Trade Center. So if you haven't been there to the Four Seasons of the World Trade Center, this is your opportunity to see a great restoration project and also support a great cause. So with that getting out of the way, let me introduce my co-host and our panelists for today's event. First of all, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Michelle Shoriak, who is PRC's Director of Education and Conservation. So Michelle came to PRC with a great deal of experience, both in academic research and does a great job with our House Histories and Facts program, and in hands-on conservation. She's worked in window restoration with Staub and worked with Cypress Building Conservation, doing a variety of field work in preservation trades. So Michelle oversees a range of our education programs, and today she'll be helping me with the audience questions that come in through our Q&A or chat feature. So as you're listening to our panelists talk, and if you have thoughts on something you'd like them to tell you more detail about, or you'd like to understand a little better, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A function, and we'll glean through those and read those at the end of the program to try and get as many of them answered as we can. And now I'll introduce our panelists, beginning with Hartley Crunk, who is a Senior Vice President at Hancock Whitney Bank. Hartley studied business management and went into banking in 2007 when she did private real estate banking with SunTrust in Atlanta. So she's been in real estate finance for quite a long time, and went on to private banking with JP Morgan in Baton Rouge, and has been with Hancock Whitney since 2013. And as I said, ascended to the role of Senior Vice President through her attention to customer service and her willingness to work with clients to find creative solutions, whether that's lending or saving, investing. And when she's not working, she is mother to 3 children, and an avid sailor. So you might, if you go out on Lake Pontchartrain, see Hartley skimming over the waves in her sailboat. And of course, in addition to her work and play, she's an active member of the community. She serves on the Preservation Resource Center board, for which we're grateful to have her as treasurer, but also the Academy of the Sacred Heart Alumni Association, and Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Next, I'd like to introduce Katie Boyer, who is with Ryan Gootee General Contractors, and Katie is a project manager there. She began as a summer intern, worked her way up to an assistant project manager, and is now full-time project manager there, having studied construction management at LSU. And in addition to being interested in the building trades and architecture and construction for many years, she's a multi-talented person. I don't know that we're going to ask her to juggle today, but she is a self-taught juggler, which I think, you know, maybe for the after party, Katie will show off her skills as a juggler. And some of the projects that she has worked on that you have seen around the city, if you're from New Orleans, if you visited New Orleans recently, would be Our Lady of Good Counsel Church, the Spire Project at the former Norwegian Seamen's Church that's featured in our Preservation and Print magazine, and the Sazerac House, which was a project actually on which Ashley's firm did the architecture. So a nice synergy there between one of our guests and our moderator. And our third panelist is Sarah Martzolf, who is a realtor, has been a realtor since 2004. And in 2017, teamed up with two partners to form the Martzolf Group. And that's a full service real estate firm, by which I mean that they don't just list your property, they really help their clients stage property to think about investments that they might make in improving it before they put it on the market. And of course, they help people acquire property that they might be using for personal or commercial reasons. Sarah, her background is in art, as an art major at Colorado College, and she has, amongst her many experiences in real estate, filmed a pilot for HGTV in which she renovated a shotgun house and walked viewers through that process. And she does still acquire and renovate properties in New Orleans, in addition to being in realty service for her clients. Some of her service to the community includes being on the Preservation Resource Center board, and also the Dress for Success New Orleans board, where she's vice president, the New Orleans Women's Professional Council, and the Herman Grima Gallier House. So Sarah's very involved in the community, and is herself a graduate of our Historic House Specialist course, which will be offered soon. Michelle could tell you about that perhaps at the end of the program. And last but not least, I want to introduce our moderator, Ashley King. Ashley recently became a partner at the architecture firm Trapolin-Peer, where she has worked for almost 2 decades. And in that time, she has distinguished herself as a skilled designer, as someone who serves her clients well, while also putting appropriate new construction in context and putting historic buildings back into commerce that have fallen into disuse and vacant. So her expertise really is in integrating design into a historic context, and she puts that expertise to use not just for her clients professionally, but for the good of the city by volunteering on the Architectural Review Committee of our Central Business District Historic District Landmarks Commission. So she's one of those people that gives free advice to her competitors as part of her volunteer work for our city. So we're grateful for that, keeping everybody on the straight and narrow with the design guidelines and ensuring that our city remains the kind of place that millions of people want to visit every year and have an authentic experience. So you will know some of Ashley's work if you've seen the Julia on Julia Street, new construction, or if you've been to Covington and stayed at the Southern Hotel, which is a marvelous historic renovation project that we should all be so lucky to have a weekend getaway to the Southern Hotel. But with that, I will turn it over to Ashley as our moderator, and thank you to each of our panelists. We're excited to hear what you have to say.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nathan. And thank you, everyone, for attending. So I'm going to sort of start off with sort of a twofold question for everybody, is sort of what is in your field, what is your traditional relationship to commercial real estate? Which role do you play? And then sort of secondary, what is sort of a non-traditional role? What do people would be surprised about how you can contribute to the success of a commercial real estate project? And I guess Hartley, you want to start us off?
Sure. So I am mostly involved in commercial real estate and residential to some degree in helping owners of these properties find the financing that's necessary to do what they want. So whether that's acquire the property, whether that's renovate the property, any kind of list of things like that. I think most of us would agree that while it would be great if we all just had all this cash and we could just pay cash for everything, in the real world, things cost money and things cost a lot of money sometimes. So finding an appropriate financing partner is always an important aspect to these projects. I'd say that we at the bank are brought in at many different points in the process. It's helpful to be on the front end of the process, but it's not impossible to jump in kind of pretty far down the road sometimes to be able to help people get what they need out of any sort of real estate project. I would say one thing that we do, or I spend a lot of time doing, is helping people evaluate whether the purchase of a property and its possible renovation are a good investment. Sometimes there's a lot of factors. Sometimes people don't understand the cost that might be there when you peel back a wall and you find all sorts of great things behind there, especially in our lovely, humid, moist climate. But that's something that we see a fair bit of and can help people. I maybe don't know the expertise. I help people find the right types of people, but right types of companies and people to help them evaluate that stuff. So I think that's all the questions, but let me know if I missed something. Okay. All right.
That was great because I think that will help segue a little bit later into some other. Katie, you want to go next?
Hey, yeah. I like what Hartley said about trying to find the right property within a budget, because your budget doesn't just stop at the actual sale of the property. You're gonna want it to look awesome. And I mean, as a contractor, we're here to do that. But Ashley, you can definitely attest to the issues that you run into if you're dealing with a historic building. And things that will come up that you don't expect to. Even with being involved early on, you're not gonna be able to really foresee everything until you really get into demolition. I think the traditional role for us as general contractors would be, property gets acquired and then you team up with an architect, create some drawings, and then you hand it over to the contractor and they build it. But I think this industry has really figured out how to kind of expedite the entire process. And the more efficient way to do it is really to get a contractor involved early. And by doing that, we can weigh in on, you really shouldn't go with these really expensive light fixtures, or if we move to metal studs and not wood framing, it could be faster, it could be cheaper, it could be more expensive. But definitely enough in the budget, not only for your vision, but also to expect the unexpected. And having a team, a financial team to really weigh in on that and be aware of that is that's key. Because I know we have had experiences where the financial backers just sign the documents and bounce.
Yeah. Yes. I've seen that a few times, and definitely, Katie, I can attest to how valuable it is to have, having contractors on board early on. It saves time on our end, prevents us having to redraw things and waste hours in terms of value engineering, which is also another segue into Sarah. And sort of the traditional and then the non-traditional roles that you play.
Sorry, I was muted. Is there a specific area on that you'd like me to touch on, or?
however you would like to take that, because I know that similar to Katie, you know, and contractors working together early, we're working together early in a design project too.
Yes.
And I don't,
I figured that
so.
might be where you were leading me. So I'll take it from there. Thank you. Yeah, so if you'll notice, I'm actually a residential real estate agent. That being said, there are several commercial overlaps, and that's actually why Katie and Nathan had asked me to do this. I'm not Katie, I'm sorry, Ashley, I got all tongue-tied. I am working on Ashley right now. It was a great project. It's a commercial project that is taking tax credits for a historic building that's being converted from a commercial space to a handful of residential units, as well as a commercial space on the ground floor. And where I've been helpful is that I've actually learned quite a bit on all the commercial and the architecture that goes into it, so it's been really fun to learn. But where I have been able to be helpful is that I know the real estate market on the resale for buyers. I know that emotional residential real estate end. So where commercial is all numbers and dollars and cents, and that makes sense on paper, when it comes to selling it, you still need that buyer to fall in love with it, just like any other residential property. So having been an agent for about 20 years now, you know, I build and renovate houses, as Nathan said. I usually build when I've paid attention to all the things that a buyer said didn't work for them in their other houses. So since I work with buyers on houses that they're either looking to move up or down from, I hear the reasons why. Maybe they need more space, maybe they have too much space, maybe they don't have enough storage. And so when it comes into these planning for these commercial spaces that have residential use, all of those potential outcome end people need to be involved. So everything from how is it going to get installed to what is going to get installed and who's that buyer going to be. And there's a long process that goes into it too. You know, it's not just, I'm going to paint my house and list it next week. It's, I need to make these floor plans functional, that's going to get approved by the city, that then we're going to build a year from now, that then materials may be back ordered. So all this has to make sense for, you know, 2 years potentially out, and that finding that nuance of the market and who's that buyer going to be in 2 years is been really fun to work on. But I would say a few pieces that I've been really able to be helpful on are the, what is that buyer going to be looking for when they're walking in? What's their immediate reaction going to be? And that has to do with everything from just knowing why people move and why they come, as well as how to market that property. And I know Ashley's heard me say this several times, and I might be going down another rabbit hole, so I'll keep it smooth, I'll keep it short. But whenever I'm laying out a space, you know, you're working with all the different players, and the plumber wants things to go one way, and the architect wants it to go another way, and the engineer needs it to be structurally sound. I'm looking at how I'm going to market the property. So how is that buyer actually going to fall in love with it? And that's how I'm going to photograph it. That's how am I going to actually be able to market it and have those wow moments that you walk in and that kitchen, we're actually able to photograph it, that it looks the biggest and therefore it looks the most valuable. Or, you know, if it's storage space that we're showing off, or outdoor space, any of those things that make that property unique, how to market it. So getting involved early on, that I can, one, say, okay, well, I know that 90% of buyers, this is going to work for them. And, you know, we need this much storage, we need these much nuances to change the floor plan. It's also, and Ashley and I have worked on a lot of this, is how to walk in that door, see as much natural light as possible, be able to photograph the bathroom, the kitchens that they look the biggest, and make the place look the biggest. Because as people don't fall in love online or on that first picture, they're never going to get into the property. So I need to be in there to make sure it's the most marketable from day one, so that I can get the audience in and then make sure knows about the property.
And another point, Sarah, I think you were really instrumental in helping us determine what these units would sell for a square foot. And that in turn changed the financing for the project. And also to the point where, you know, it might be a condominium project versus an apartment project. And so, which also does somewhat, we need to evaluate the tax credits, but there's other tax credits that are available. So Hartley, maybe going back to, since Sarah, Katie, and I sort of already touched on it, how do you help your clients sort of evaluate, you know, whether a project is a good investment, and how do you pull in other people to help determine that, or what are sort of your barometers in that regard?
Sure. So for commercial and residential can be viewed two separate ways. From a financing standpoint, there are two separate buckets, not to get into a whole bunch of detail, but mostly the federal regulations from a financing perspective are different depending on the purchaser of the property and the use of the property. So for commercial property, we're really looking at rents, like what type of rental income the commercial property can can make. We're working with the real estate agents like Sarah to come up with what those figures might be if it's a renovation type project. And then making an educated guess on what we think the expenses for the property will be, which is a guess and is a ballpark, because we don't know exactly what the month-to-month expenses are going to be till you get in there. But we do have some historical data that we go to and some averages that we can leverage to come up with a ballpark figure. And that we arrive at what we call NOI, or net operating income. We take that number, and that really drives a lot of our feedback in terms of how much financing someone can support, or a project can support, and evaluating that plus how much financing you might need can help us sit down with owners to say, okay, if you pay X for this property, you finance Y, here's your income, so your return on this investment's this other number. Is that something that is beneficial to them? Each person's going to have a different answer to that question. Some people are looking for higher returns. Some people have different values. Some people say, I want to buy this building as long as it covers its expenses. I don't need to make money on it. I just love its historic something, and I've got another plan for it later down the road. Some people say, I need my money out like as soon as possible, so we want to sell it. There's just a lot of different viewpoints, and everybody's going to be in a different stage there, but we sit down with them and can help talk through those issues and those kind of goals that everybody wants, and come up with some options. Sometimes it means more financing. Sometimes it means less financing. Sometimes it means build part of the building, kind of renovate the outside, prep the inside, but then wait till you have a tenant to go tell you what color they want the walls and whether they need a kitchenette or a kitchen or whatever nuance each tenant might need. Because obviously it depends. If you got a restaurant tenant, they're going to need one thing. If you've got a dry cleaning tenant, you need something else. If you have a residential tenant, you need something altogether. Although I think everyone can guess pretty good at what a residential tenant needs, since we all live somewhere. But that is something that we do. I personally am a lover of architecture, especially historic architecture. So I'm always selfishly going in there, be like, don't tear this wall down, just do whatever you need to keep this wall up. Or just little nuances like that, like don't get a new door. I know it's got cracks and holes and it's going to cost you probably an extra $200 a month to like air condition your room, but this door is so beautiful, please don't rip it out. I'm like obviously exaggerating there, but my dad's an architect, and so growing up kind of with that in mind, I've always had an eye for that and always paid attention to those things. So that's something that I just personally value.
Well, great. Well, that actually sort of segues nicely into sort of the next question is, and I'm going to stay on you, Hartley, is when ideally would you like to come into a project? And then also, who sort of other partners would you like to see at the table to help with sort of this advice that you mentioned?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's helpful. There are two types of borrowers. There are borrowers that I maybe have never met before and I don't know very well. And those people, if we haven't, I don't mean but I mean the bank or whoever financial institution you're using, don't have a relationship with you, it is helpful to know on the front end, meaning, let's say, I don't know, let's say Nathan comes to me and is like, hey, I want to buy this commercial building. We've never worked together. So I'm like, hey, Nathan, like, what's your budget? Kind of, what are you trying to get out of it? Super, super high level. Like, we haven't even identified a property yet. So there's that scenario. And the alternative scenario would be someone that I do work with, that I have had a relationship with, and that I know I already have a flavor for kind of what they're looking for, kind of what their budgets typically are. So they can let me know they're looking for another property, but usually to give them any sort of really good feedback, I need an address. So I would say once the property's been identified, that's usually the key time to involve your financing person. So that those financing people can help come up with your budget before you've identified the property, but also once the property's been identified, give you hard and fast numbers to say, here's what this looks like. And then to answer your other question, Ashley, about who else would be at the table, I think it's helpful to have the architect and the contractor, although I would say most of the time we don't all sit at the same table together necessarily, but I'm getting feedback from the contractor to say, hey, this is the budget. But the contractor, I know, has already talked to the architect, because the contractor probably isn't going to want to come up with a budget without talking to the architect first, which I'm sure Katie will touch on those points. But that's also helpful in terms of having some additional information. That's pretty much the bare bones amount of information that we can work with. I would say the more information, the better, the more specifics we can get, and the better our estimate of either financing value or financing return can be.
Great. And Katie, and I know you already sort of touched on this already about coming to the table early and the value that it can bring. Anything else that you might want to elaborate on that? Who else should be at the table besides an architect?
Yeah. I mean, going off of what Hartley was saying about really the relationship determines your next steps. I thought that was interesting. I know in particular, we have one client who they have developed a few properties with us in the past, and they were trying to move forward with another property. Things kind of, I think things fell through with the leasing, actual, like it was a strip mall, so like the main owner of the strip mall property, something fell through with them. So our client was like, look, let's just put it on hold until I find something that really fits us better. So obviously, we have the relationship with that client, and we know that that client's going to want to use us, and we can weigh in from a high level perspective of, look, it would cost, roughly this amount of money, but it will vary property to property. So depending on the state that the actual building is in, and it would be helpful in that specific case if someone like Sarah kept in touch with us, and we could maybe just go on a site walk with them and check it out and give our rough opinion of how much work, how much elbow grease would really need to go into that to get it to where they want to be. Or, I mean, really, I would say if Hartley knew the budget that they had to work with, then I would say she should coordinate with like Sarah's team, narrow it down, and then come and have us involved. It's really like, it's a cyclical relationship. You could start in one corner and end up at the other. I don't think it's going to hurt you starting with one team over the other. But no matter what, you need them all involved at some point. I know there are some developers who think that they can handle it all themselves, whether it's the actual like project management side, or whether it's the searching, or they have their own private lender that they don't want to get involved with anything. I mean, the more communication, the better. So the more collaboration, the better. We are more than happy to come in as early as possible. Typically, we don't get involved until a property's been secured and there might be some drawings in the works. I know, Ashley, your office has involved us in some design assist properties before. But then we've also only been handed drawings, and then you're kind of starting a little in front of rather than behind the ball in that case. But really it's whatever fits the client's needs at that time, really, and we can work with it.
The other thing that I'll add on that is like, it's a fluid process, which I think Katie was trying to make that point. Like, you can, whoever you decide to start with, whichever partner, whether it's the contractor, the architect, or the financing group, it like for us, it's not unusual to be like, here's option A, and then 6 months go by and it's like, oh wait, nope, here's option B, or like refine these options, or a few things have changed, or I know someone will probably mention this, but like getting windows apparently is really hard right now because of supply chain problems. Like, maybe we build less windows, I don't know, but like something that's like a fluid line of communication. So it's very, very usual that I put a lot of different options together for the same project. And I mean, I think Sarah was mentioning, I mean, these projects don't happen overnight. Usually they're actually pretty long, surprisingly long, I think, to a lot of people that are first time in doing a reno project. They're like, wait, what? This is going to take 2 years or whatever. And I'm like, well, I mean, kind of like from beginning to end, but yes, like that's just, I don't even think that is necessarily longer today due to all these other supply chain issues and things like that we're having. I think it just really, sometimes it just takes that long to pull all the partners together and figure out what you want to do. Somebody did ask a question. I just wanted to comment on this real quick about how do you decide on the loan amount possible when current income from the tenants is below market rate due to the condition? So like, I think Jody was saying, if you have like kind of a situation where you have less rent coming in because the condition of the property needs to be improved, how do you factor in how much debt you could or how much of your loan amount you could borrow? We do run what we call a pro forma, and we say, all right, here are the rents today. If you renovate it, what do you think the rents are going to be? And then we either, if we think that the pro forma rents are reasonable, which most of the time they are, because it's just market data, we base the loan amount off that. We base it off the pro forma, here's what you're going to fix it up for, here's what you'll then rent it out for, and we can base it off that. And we can take into account rental increases like post improvement. Does that answer your question, Jody? You're probably muted, but just chat me if you have any more.
Great. So Sarah, I know we talked about the benefit of you coming in early on a project. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, or maybe touch on our next question. What is the downfall if you're brought in too late to a project?
I think that's an easier one to add to. I can't tell you how many times I've been on a listing appointment not related to a specific project, and I walked in and I'm like, does anybody think about what they were putting in here? Like, did they use an architect? Did they use a contractor that, and really to Katie's point, the contractor is not the one that's deciding how it should be done. They're looking at an architectural plan and then give you an actual amount based on that plan. So I think there's a lot of confusion on what the difference between an architect and a contractor are in general in residential, but I'll leave that for another conversation. But yeah, there's a lot of times I walk in, I'm like, gee, if they would have just asked me my opinion, and not that I'm the person that has all the best opinions, but I would say 5 out of 10 renovations are really poorly thought out, and people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, even on a small spec home, to put in a bunch of stuff that doesn't work together. And, it used to be after Katrina, it was like, oh, well, the contractor just went to Home Depot and bought whatever was on sale kind of thing. And it hasn't gotten that much better if there's not really a planner. So a couple things. One, I think it's great when I can come in early because one, I know what that market is, and I know what those buyers are looking for. If it's too late, you can't always just go out a wine fridge or add another luxury item like the one that Ashley and I are working on, for example. It was going to start out as apartments and luxury apartments, but then they were going to transfer them over and use the federal tax credits to condos. I believe it was 5 years later. Well, those are two different business models. You know, what you're doing for apartments is different than what you're doing for condos. And as this whole project shifted and we realized, well, gee, there's such a demand for condos right now, that changed the whole plan. So that's a perfect example of if I wasn't involved then and they all of a sudden just decided to go condos, those units may not have actually been very saleable, or definitely not for the price they were trying to get. So to really maximize the rate of return on the investment, which I know is one of Hartley's favorite phrases, is get people involved, whether it mean residential real estate agents, but the architects and all the players that go into it ahead of time. You can't fix stuff that's already put together when it's bricks and masonry. You can only work around stuff so much. You know, you can't go pop in plumbing because you wanted to, but when it's open, you absolutely can, and you can think through all those things. And I think I got myself off subject of something else I was going to say, but I think I answered your question, so maybe it'll come back to me.
Sarah, I was going to say, there's definitely more value than just the dollar amount, like you were saying. And there's value in everybody's opinions. Even if it seems a little irrelevant at the time, like it might come back to haunt you later. But definitely early involvement, even if it's just ideas. I mean, we offer pre-construction services as well, and there's a reason that pre-construction exists, and it's a way for you as an owner or as in a sales position to even be aware of what exactly that property is capable of. I mean, you just kind of noted the plumbing aspect. Like not all slabs can take it. You might get into it and it might just totally crumble on you. That's absolutely happened to us before. So yeah, it's, even if it's just consulting with a contractor for their professional opinion, it's worth it in the end. There's more value in that than just the dollar amount.
And Katie, what are some other downfalls if a contractor is brought in too late in the game?
I think the old school way of construction, the whole like construction process is, you know, design and then you bid and then you build. Having a contractor involved early allows you to at least get a leg up on some of the design conflicts. It's inevitable. I mean, it's not necessarily a mistake on the architect or the engineer's part. So no shame, no shade
Thank
to
you.
you. But I mean, like one of the most common things is ductwork not fitting in a ceiling or being in conflict with the existing structural members. And that's something that we have to work around. There are times that you can catch that in a drawing if you have enough time to go through it. I know we have like I think it's like a 250 question checklist to actually scrub the drawings and see everything. Or you may not have drawings at all. There was one property, it was 800 Metairie Road. It was a Capital One and a Pier One in the strip mall with Langenstein's. And they had a safe in the Capital One because it was a bank. And now that specific wing is pediatric exam rooms. But when we walked in there, it was like, originally it was like, this is just a big space. We can just convert this. And it's not that simple. Like there's a little extra work that needs to happen to this safe that is in the ground, or just different aspects like that, that I wouldn't expect somebody who isn't, you know, familiar with it every day to understand. Just like I don't understand like the financing nuances or the actual sale of the property nuances. Like I'm taking notes as y'all are speaking because I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I never would have thought about that. But it's just, I don't know. I always find it fascinating to pick people's brains on things. They'll make fun of me in my office because I'm always like, what do you think about like this bizarre topic? But it really is helpful because there's no way that any one of us could really configure an entire development of a building. I mean, even just a home by yourself. So I guess just proactive planning, really, to answer your question quickly.
And Ashley, if I can just add to what Katie's
Please.
saying, a perfect example of, like, so people that are listening can kind of like, okay, what are they getting at? Plumbing. You cannot just easily move plumbing. You cannot move a toilet just because you want to move a toilet. If you have not figured out where that toilet's going to be and you want a half bath there, you're not getting one. Like, if you do not get, you know, supply lines you can run in the walls, but I can't tell you how many times on a second or third floor, people are like, but I want the toilet over here. It's not moving. So that is 100%. And you can't just go add another toilet because it may not fit your sewer line. So there's a whole lot of things with that you really need to think about ahead of time. That's the most practical one I can come up with.
It sounds like you're a little familiar with it, Sarah.
Yeah, that sewer line has to connect to a sewer line that is in the ground. So how you get there without tearing out everything that's below you, that's the challenge.
Or you can,
is
and
the
it'll
sewer
just cost
line-
you a lot more, and then Hartley will be frustrated.
Well, and also, is that sewer line large enough to handle that many toilets? You know, I mean, there's a certain number, you know, your sewer line in the ground has to change if you add so many more toilets. So some things to know that if they're not planned, that's just my biggest takeaway on the toilets. The grossest, but the most necessary.
I do think if you involve everyone really to some extent on the front end, you really can save a lot of money on the back end.
Mhm.
I see a lot of people that are hesitant to be like, oh, I don't know, like, do I want to spend a couple $1,000s to have like a prelim meeting with a contractor? Like, I'm not ready yet. And it's like, well, but that might save you like $20,000 or $30,000 later when you can't move the toilet from corner left to corner right, like things like that, where it's just spending a little bit of money up front is not always a bad thing. And sometimes it shows you that either one, you can't afford it yet, or something like right now we're seeing a lot of surge in pricing, which I'm sure Katie can give a lot more details on in terms of cost, and Sarah can give a lot more comments in terms of saleable value. But that surge in price might impact your return, but also might impact your risk tolerance. You might be like, you know what, there's just too much going on. There's too much uncertainty. Like, I'll give an example. I had a client who wanted to build some vacation homes, and the contractor kept adding buckets into the allowance into the kind of the bucket that I'll try to explain this. The contractor can basically say, we don't know how much this is going to cost. We're giving you a budget today, like timber. And if the timber yard charges me more, I'm just going to pass it on to you. I'm not trying to make any more money, but just someone's going to have to pay for that. Where the owner was like, okay, that's like, this is too much now. This is too much risk. If I don't know how much this is going to cost, how will I know how much money I'm making? And therefore, how do I know this is a really good investment? So there's a lot of work that goes on the front end to answer those questions, and sometimes it's okay to say, this is too much, hands up, I can't, this is too much risk.
Hartley's coming from a really good place on the cost on that. There's also, and I'm going to give a plug to good contractors for a hot second, because it used to be in New Orleans, just get somebody to show up and do the work, and this guy can do it for half as much as this guy, and that seemed like a good deal. With the way that materials are at a shortage right now, labor is at a shortage right now, you need an architect and you need a very good contractor who has people on staff that can actually show up. Because two things: one, you need that architect to have actually drawn that property exactly how you want it. For the contractor, then you give you a price of exactly what it's going to cost, and actually contract with you that they guarantee that cost, even if things move. If you don't give a contractor in a drawing that they are pricing off, they're going to give you a ballpark, and you're going to pay whatever the current rate is at that time, because they had nothing to actually give you a solid estimate on. So having those two people, you might spend several $1,000s on those plans, but let's say that contract bid, to Hartley's point, was twice as much as you thought. Well, that money you just spent on those plans saves you a ton of money on the back end. And furthermore, on the good contractors in that point, good contractors right now have staff. They have subs that are showing up. You know, don't think you're going to save money by getting an off the wall contractor. I'm right now renovating a project that I know better, and I'm actually going to completely contradict myself. I got the Joe Schmo contractor. It was supposed to be a 4-month job. I'm on month 20. I've been carrying the costs and all of this for 16 months more than I needed to, because I chose the cheap contractor that didn't know any better, and I knew what I was doing at the time. So while numbers get big in these, if you're investing in a large commercial project, your numbers are going to be big. Spend the money up front to make sure that you're really dealing with the right people and that you know exactly what you're building and what that cost is going to be.
And residential. I mean, commercial can be bigger dollars, so like the numbers can be scarier, but residential can add up too. And there was one other thing I was going to say that Sarah reminded me, but I forgot. So when it
I'm
comes,
sorry.
Well, no, that actually is a great segue to one of my other questions, is that what piece of advice do you wish your clients would listen to? Because, you know, there's always, we all have that one thing, you're like, I told you so. So what are the things that you wish your clients would listen to more, or sort of the I told you so moments?
I would say, yeah, spend the money up front. I know that's not everybody's like forte. My husband likes to try to buy the cheap thing and then buy the expensive thing later. And it's like, to me, that doesn't make any sense. Do your research, spend the money up front, buy it once and keep it. I think it's better to spend the money on being proactive than reactive, like Hartley was saying. But also, I probably lost my train of thought as well. Just, yeah, the early involvement aspect. It's hard to justify spending a lot of money with somebody that you probably just met. So I think relationships go a very long way. I know that we've done a lot of work with your firm, Ashley, and that's something that can really carry you through like a difficult decision process as far as, well, I don't know who this contractor is. I don't know if I can trust them. You know, word of mouth can go much further than a simple Google search. But I also think that being able to just weigh in, I don't even know where I was going with this. The relationship aspect of it is the main thing that I wish my customers would spend the money on for maybe the contractor that's a little more expensive, because you can trust us.
They're doing their work. The other thing I'll say that we haven't actually talked about is leverage the PRC. I mean, they have so many resources. I mean, they're the Preservation Resource Center, and they have so many resources, but also they've helped so many people go through a renovation project. So if you're new to this and you're like starting to feel a little overwhelmed because we all three gave you very scary things to think about, you know, reach out to Nathan, reach out to Michelle, reach out to any of us even as well, but to say like, I want to do this interests me, but I kind of don't know where to start there. They can help guide you and give you some additional information. They can give you some resources. They can give you reading materials. They can give you people to connect with. I mean, they have, and it like the three of us are just examples. We, you know, if there's plenty of options, like there's plenty of real estate agents that we work with. There's plenty of architects that we work with. There's plenty of contractors that we work with, meaning PRC, not the bank. There's plenty of banks the PRC works with. So reach out to the PRC and say, I don't know where to start. I need some help. And they'll give you, we have a ton, the PRC has a ton of resources to help you decide where your risk tolerance is, where your interests are, what your goals are, and to say, all right, let's start here. Or maybe you think you can handle this size project and you're actually like, well, maybe I actually need a smaller project to start with, kind of get my feet wet and escalate from there. I did remember what else I was going to say. So let me just say this real quick. When Sarah was saying that in her example, how this renovation project was supposed to be 4 months and she's still carrying it 20 months later, like a very tangible example of why that is more expensive. Because you might be thinking like, well, the cabinets are the cabinets price, whether it comes in now or in month 20, why is that more expensive? It's because of financing.
You're paying for them 20 months later.
You're paying interest that entire time without income.
Order your cabinets now.
Yeah, exactly. Order your windows, order your cabinets. But that's why that really is what it comes down to, why it's more expensive the longer the project goes, is because of the interest. Not that any sort of financing group is trying to gouge you. It's just the longer it goes, the more it costs. So that's just something to think about. And I would say for us, the thing that I'm always like, I told you so, is people are like, oh, well, they, the contractor told me to take 6 months to do it. I'm going to do it in 4. And I'm like, yeah, we're going to budget 20 months, because literally we are going to budget 20 months because shit happens. Sorry. But like, that's just life. I mean, like, you can't, and then it's like, it rains. And like, you're like, oh, I can't pour the concrete, can't pour the slab because it's been raining for 2 weeks. Yep. Well, guess what? You just had to pay financing for 2 extra weeks because I can't control the weather. And so it's just that's just an example, but that is how projects go. There's weather, there are humans, there are supply chain problems, there are labor problems. So all of those things, when you combine them all, that causes delays. So I am always adding at least 3 months to every person that comes into me that's like, oh, it's going to take 6 months. I'm like, how about 9? And then we'll maybe
Yeah,
start.
because they need that in order to determine like when they would actually have money coming back in.
Absolutely. It's not like financing ends and your tenants start paying you rent the next day. Like it just, I mean, like just logistically think through like, how does that actually happen? And like, you might not have furniture. I mean, furniture is like a whole nother thing. So it just these pieces of all this stuff just takes a long time. So be real with yourself and buffer your time zone. And if you're so tight on your budget that you don't have a buffer of time zone, reconsider the project.
Very smart.
Well, great. Any other takeaways, I guess, before we go into questions? I see Nathan and Michelle back on. Do we want to dive into questions, or do we want to sort of have a takeaway from our panelists? Nathan or Michelle?
Well, certainly if you all have any closing thoughts, we don't want to cut you off. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate everybody's enthusiastic engagement. I've learned a lot, and I think our audience has held in there very steady, shows that they're interested. So we'll go ahead and ask one question that I got via a message, which is regarding a feasibility study. Someone was looking at an architect, really shopping around for an architect, thought they were going to get a quote, and instead they got a quote for a couple of grand on a feasibility study, and they weren't sure if they were being sold just a bill of goods or if this was standard operating procedure. They weren't quite sure how to receive that. So how normal is that, and what should people think about if they're looking for an architect or someone else and they are told, well, we'll do a feasibility study?
Well, and I guess everyone else can sort of weigh in. I highly recommend feasibility studies in the beginning of a project. And it depends on how detailed that feasibility study is. It could be, a quick back of the, pencil sketch of, because for when we do feasibility studies, we look at zoning, like what is allowed to be built in that area, be constructed in that building. Like if you're looking at multifamily, how many residential units could you potentially get into that? Because it's, lay out, approximately how many 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, because and then giving a rough idea of what your average construction cost would be, knowing that what we're seeing, because Katie, I'm sure that you could, 285, 250 a square foot for like a 60,000 square foot renovant commercial project, like rough ballpark, without knowing, finishes. If you're giving someone that early information with very little work, then that'll give something to respond to Hartley in terms of financing. And then also, Sarah, like, are we on the right page in terms of what we could sell these for? And for a very small amount of money up front, you can know how viable that project is before spending, hundreds of $1,000s on design fees, than to get it priced much later on down the road. And then you're stuck with a building that you're not going to have the right return on your investment. So these feasibility studies can get done before you even put down a down payment on a project. I mean, I've done it on we've done feasibility studies on very crude pieces of information. And so the cost is really, that couple of $1,000s cost is how much information you need. It could be $2,000-3,000 for something very simple, or it could be more if you need additional information in terms of like having to go to the city and submitting to ARC. So that might take it up another level if you're looking at doing an addition and you want to get feedback from the ARC or for tax credits, the early feedback from SHPO or something. So it really depends on what level of information you need, but it sort of ties into this whole conversation.
That's great. We've got a question from Julie, who's wondering about the wisdom of making her first foray into real estate investing for either resale versus rental. So could you maybe give a little bit of advice for someone who's interested in dipping their toe in commercial real estate, and they're not sure whether they want to purchase something, renovate it and sell it, or they want to actually be a landlord and kind of buy and hold it, but have to manage a property. Any advice on that?
I'd say two things. I'd say first look at the numbers. So obviously I'm an analytical person, but if you can, like Airbnb right now, I mean, like Airbnb type short-term rentals is very hot right now. But let's say, the income you can do from short-term rentals is X, which is higher than if you rented it on an annual basis, like on a, year-long leases. Evaluate the income and evaluate, option A, B, and C. Like I have another customer who was like, I want to build these either condo, to Sarah's point, might be condos, might be apartments, might be short-term rentals. I don't know what it is yet, but he ran the numbers to say like, this is the income from option B, this is income from option B, this is income from option C. What's the best one? And in some of that discovery, you can discover sometimes it's cheaper to build one or renovate one way than another. And that's where I think Sarah can come in a lot, be very helpful in that process and in evaluating that, because she's got her finger on the pulse in terms of the market and can help you come up with those estimates. And then the other thing I'll say is for residential versus commercial in terms of like kind of standard financing costs and stuff, you can find a fair amount of information just Googling it, just kind of like ballpark terms. But I'd say for residential properties, it's very typical that someone's got to come up with 20% equity, 80% financing. And for commercial properties, 30% equity, 70% financing. So those are kind of like really rough ballpark buckets that we turn to. Every deal's got its own nuances, but when you're kind of in that early stage, that's a good barometer to start.
I would also add that there are certain little tax credits that you can get just like depending where you are, where your property is, that I'm sure, like I saw Ashley and Hartley both nod their heads. Sarah, I'm sure you're aware of it as well. That's something that can definitely help your financing piece of it, but you're going to need to tell your contractor ahead of time, or at least upfront. I mean, it doesn't have to be like, well ahead of time, but just there's a lot of documentation and a lot of reporting and dealing with the city. There are companies that specialize in that, like strategic, I forgot the name of it. It's like Sherman Strategies. They will just handle that for you for a cost, but it's worth it if you're going to get like a 5-year tax credit.
Yeah, so definitely historic tax credits. They're great benefit, 20% federal, 20% state tax credits for commercial properties. But there are certain,
like construction requirements.
Right. There's certain things that you need to preserve and as part of that rehabilitation project of the existing building. The intent of that tax credit is to keep as many historic properties as they can. It's not as daunting as everyone thinks, so don't let that scare you. Just make sure that
No,
you have.
but it can be
So-
if you try to do it like halfway through the project.
Yes, yes, you kind of got to know where you're going to start, and then on top of historic tax credits, I have to at least note that the PRC offers facade easements, which is another source of tax benefits, and that you are donating your facade in perpetuity to the PRC, and then you get a donation for your losses as a result of that. So that's two tax credits that are directly related to historic preservation. And then there's new market tax credits on top of that. And I'm sure, Hartley, you can name a few others.
Well, I was actually thinking maybe Katie was also referring to restoration tax abatement, which is a property tax relief tool, or at least prevents your property taxes from skyrocketing immediately after you make an investment to repair a building. So that's a third thing for people to consider in terms of carrying cost of commercial real estate, property taxes, and could you hedge your bets to keep the level for at least the first 5 years?
So again, PRC has lots of resources.
Well, thank you all for singing our song and singing our praises, and most of all, thank you for your time. Definitely, yes. Anyone who's on the line wants to reach out to myself or my colleague Michelle, or just the general line here at Preservation Resource Center is welcome to do so. I also put in the chat links to the web pages for each of our panelists, where they work, and for New Orleans crew. So we really want to thank Commercial Real Estate Women for co-sponsoring this panel with us. And we're really excited about the next two in the series. So if you haven't already signed up for those, please go to prcno.org/events. Sign up for that. While you're there, you can buy your Julia Jump tickets and come join us at the party at the World Trade Center. So it's now 1 o'clock. I know this was a lunch and learn, and many people will have to get back to their desks, or back to work, at least if you're already at your desk. And I just want to thank everyone who has joined us. We had not only great attendance, but people stuck around. So I know that they're very interested. And last but not least, thank my colleagues who've helped, Michelle Shoriak on screen briefly, and Daniil behind the scenes with the technology, making this go off without a hitch. So thank you so much, Daniil and Susan and the whole team at PRC for making this happen. Hope everybody has a great rest of their day. Good afternoon.
Great. Thank y'all.